The Idries Shah Foundation podcast. Practical Psychology for Today. Featuring the works of Idries Shah, voiced by David Ault. Welcome to the Idries Shah Foundation podcast. In this edition of the podcast, we will hear selections from A Perfumed Scorpion by Idries Shah. This audio has been made available by the Idries Shah Foundation. The testing function. And the testing function is certainly there. The chief feature of this testing, however, is to illustrate to the person himself what some of his major characteristics of thought are, so that he may modify them or be able to detach from them, instead of being their slave. Observing each other's reactions, too, can help a class to widen their perception of the tales. One such story, The Tale of the Sands, sometimes shows people their own dependency situation, quite dramatically. In this tale, the river, aware of its existence, runs towards the sea, but arrives before that at a stretch of sand, and starts to run away into nothingness, to become, at best, a marsh. Terrified of losing its identity, but with no real alternative, the river allows itself to be lifted up by the wind, though only after much debate and soul-searching. The wind carries it out of danger and allows it to fall, as water, safely as it precipitates against a mountain at the other side. Some people love this story. For others, it has the awful quality of reminding them that they must die, or that they may be being asked to choose someone or something of whom, or of which, they know next to nothing, of a different kind from themselves, to submit to this and to be carried away to somewhere or something of which they have no knowledge or guarantee. Do these two reactions describe the story, or the people who are commenting on it? People exposed to this story can learn a lot about themselves just by testing its effect upon their feelings. Rather, as it were, like a radioactive tracer in the bloodstream, you can observe the effect of these stories as they work their way through the culture. Human reactions to them are so varied and so indicative of the major preoccupations of those reacting that there is such a great deal of useful instruction in how people behave to be gained just by monitoring what the story's fate has been over a period of a decade. Brainstorming sessions have been called to crack the codes of their meaning. Papers have been written on their origins and derivatives. Middle Eastern publishers have been affronted that I could make what they imagine must be a good living by publishing futile tales from villages in backward areas. Some self-styled Sufis have claimed that they knew all about them all the time, but wanted to use more effective means, while others of the same kidney have started to teach them themselves, saying to any inquirer that they had just been waiting to get around to them. And some, of course, have been setting them as exercises to their students, teasing out strange supposed meanings, or saying that one must not look for any meaning at all. Nasruddin. The stories seem to have a magic which makes people reveal their true selves, one constantly feels. And they make a lot of things out of the academic world work. One scholar has told everyone who would listen that I had invented the esoteric qualities ascribed to the Mullah Nasruddin corpus. When he was told that there was an article about this by a Westerner who had studied these matters actually in the East, he instantly replied that I must have written the article myself. I am wondering what he will say when he learns that one of the earliest translations of Nasruddin in English, over a century old, speaks of this esoteric quality of what later became thought of merely as a joke figure. He will no doubt think that I am a reincarnation of the translator of that time. Putting in and taking out. What tends to make a fruitful approach to the tales difficult currently in the West is that the very tendencies which they are trying to describe are sometimes increased by the stories themselves. There is the same problem in the East, of course. I have heard at least 20 versions of one quip about this very subject, which goes something like this. An impatient student approached a Sufi and asked him, "At what point will I be able to extract the meaning and make use of the content of the stories really effectively?" The sage gave a great sigh and answered, "At the exact point when you stop asking when you will get to that point and put something into your study instead of constantly trying to get something out." The legends which surround teaching tales are, of course, numerous, even magical. It is widely believed, for instance, that people who repeat the tale of Mushkul Gusha, which I have published in Caravan of Dreams, will attract the help of the mysterious personage Mushkul Gusha, the remover of all difficulties. The Nasruddin tales are under a benevolent spell. It is said that whenever one of his tales is recited, 7 more will have to be repeated, because as a schoolboy he was so addicted to stories and his teacher put this hex on him. My sister Amina Shah has recently republished the famous Sufi book The Tale of the Four Dervishes in English. The legend which goes with this book is that a Sufi master placed the benediction upon it, which makes its reciting a miraculous healing procedure. But for the most part, luckily, the story form has made the tales most usually seen as entertainment, or to be understood on their lowest level as moral warnings. This has prevented too much mumbo-jumbo from coalescing around them. Minor advantages have also been spontaneously observed. When I did a documentary program for British television, I told a group of children a tale which is familiar in Central Asia, and which we used in England as part of the teaching in the children's school at our house. The Lion Who Saw His Face in the Water. There was once a lion who lived in a desert which was very windy, and because of this, the water in the holes from which he usually drank was never still, for the wind riffled the surface and never reflected anything. One day, this lion wandered into a forest, where he hunted and played, until he felt rather tired and thirsty. Looking for water, he came across a pool of the coolest, most tempting, and most placid water that you could possibly imagine. Lions, like other wild animals, can smell water, and the scent of this water was like ambrosia to him. So the lion approached the pool and extended his neck to have a good drink. Suddenly, though, he saw his reflection and imagined that it must be another lion. "Oh dear," he thought to himself, "this must be water belonging to another lion. I had better be careful." He retreated, but then thirst drove him back again, and again he saw the head of a fearsome lion looking back at him from the surface of the pool. This time our lion hoped that he might be able to frighten the other lion away, and so he opened his mouth and gave a terrible roar. But no sooner had he bared his teeth than, of course, the mouth of the other lion opened as well, and this seemed to our lion to be an awful and dangerous sight. Again and again the lion retreated and then returned to the pool. Again and again he had the same experience. After a long time, however, he was so thirsty and desperate that he decided to himself, "Lion or no lion, I am going to drink from that pool." And lo and behold, no sooner had he plunged his face into the water than the other lion disappeared. There was no special intention of spreading this story as a psychological support or therapeutic tool for parents with fearful children. But I got a good many letters after the TV film was shown, saying how parents had been able to use the story to reassure various youngsters who had fears of the unknown or of unfamiliar situations. It is true that these tales are told to children in the East, instead of the more gruesome ones which are often found in Hans Andersen and the Brothers Grimm, and no doubt there is a gap which could be filled here. They would be useful for children and certainly entertain them, as we have found for many years. They are less attractive to many adults, as has been proved by the fact that the people who choose books for children, that is, adult publishers' readers, have universally turned them down as unsuitable or uninteresting, though, as one has kindly said, admittedly curious. The stories have become something of a rage in schools, and partly through BBC educational broadcasting, where they are constantly used and widely discussed, laying down a stratum of interest which results in constant enquiries and callers from all over the place. No account of teaching stories can be really useful unless there has been a recital of some of these tales without any explanation at all. This is because some of the effect can be prevented by an interpretation, and the difference between an exposition and a teaching event is precisely that in the latter nobody knows what his or her reaction is supposed to be from any doctrinal standpoint, so that there can be a private reaction and a personal absorption of the materials. So let us look at one or two of the tales now under conditions of no explanation, so that we can observe our own reactions. Panacea. There are colonies of dervishes, random and not well-informed seekers, who carry out rhythmic exercises which sometimes produce mental states that they regard, in the early stages of their experimentation, as divine illumination. Quite a lot of ordinary people, too, are attracted by this. They imagine, quite wrongly, that all dervishes are illuminated and respect them. One day, it is related, a well-meaning but ignorant seeker after truth arrived at the encampment of a group of these weirdly dressed dervishes, one of whose number was lying on the ground with his eyeballs rolled up in an attitude of complete surrender, on his back the very picture of total relaxation. "I have come to share your life and experience your experiences," said the man eagerly to the chief of the dervishes. "What would you like to share with us?" asked the chief. "Allow me to share the condition and state of that recumbent dervish," requested the visitor. With their customary hospitality, the dervishes obliged. Forming a ring around their new friend, they helped a scorpion to sting him. Admit 1. A dervish died and was being questioned by the two angels who stand guard over the gates of paradise. "Why should you be admitted here?" "When I was on earth, I was a follower of the great teacher Gilani." Enter. His place was taken by the next man, who was asked the same question. "I must certainly be allowed in, for I have heard what you said to the man in front of me, and I was the follower at the very same time of 3 of the greatest teachers." The angels barred his way. "No, you will not be allowed to enter." "But why not?" "Do you think that we admit people who don't know their own minds?" Moths. A Sufi once established himself at a crossroads. At night he set up a very bright lamp. Not far away he lit a candle. Beside the candle he sat and read his books. "There must be some secret wisdom in this," the people of a nearby town said to one another, but they could not fathom the language of the demonstration, if such it was, nor could they penetrate the mystery of the teaching which was being offered them. At last a group of curious citizens, unable to restrain themselves any longer, sent a deputation to ask why the Sufi had 2 forms of illumination, and why he had placed them in such a manner. "Look," he said, "at the lamp. It is surrounded every night by thousands of moths. By providing that light for moths, I am left in peace by them, to read by my candle. I please the moths, and keep them away from me." Thus it is with humanity. If everyone knew where real knowledge was, life would be chaos. As it is, people even become frenzied whenever they imagine, like the moths, that there is something which they should surround, especially if that thing is attractive to them. Reserved. There was once a pretended Sufi who had attracted a fair number of disciples, but he was nothing like as successful as a genuine teacher who lived in the next town. He made up his mind to find out what the secret formula of the real Sufi was. Disguising himself, he asked for an audience and also to be enrolled as a disciple. The Sufi took him in and said, "The one and only secret for you is that you make a mixture of sugar and water and lie out in the open air without moving, smeared with it for several hours a day. Then you will attain to the adequate truth." The impostor went back to his own headquarters and told all his followers to use the sugar and water exercise. Insects descended in swarms on all of them, and all the disciples abandoned him. Eventually, lonely and eaten up with curiosity, he returned to the Sufi. "I come to you, I now confess, to learn your secret. But when I gave your exercise to my disciples, they were plagued by hornets, and they all deserted me," he said. "That's how it should have been," said the Sufi. "The idea was that your disciples should be driven away from the impostor, and that you would be driven to the stage of desperation and focus upon a single problem from which alone you can really learn." What to see. A party of pilgrims was sitting in the presence of a great spiritual teacher when he stood up and dramatically pointed at one of them. Immediately the man fell down in an ecstasy. When they all got back to their rest house, this man became impatient while they were excitedly discussing the miracle of the instant illumination. "What about me?" he demanded. "After all, it was me he did it to." The leader of the group looked at him with disgust. "You seem to forget," he said, "that we came to see him, the great man, doing the illuminating, not to see you being illuminated." Sure remedy. A man went to visit his physician. "My trouble is," he told him, "that I fall asleep during the very long lectures given by my spiritual guide." The doctor handed him a bottle of pills. "1 3 times a day," he said. "Thank you, doctor. Do I take them with water?" "No, you don't take them. In his food, you fool." Unanimous. 2 would-be disciples met after having visited a certain sage. "I have decided, after listening to that man," said the first, "that he lacks the spiritual insights which I previously hoped would characterize him." "Yes," agreed the second seeker after truth. "He wouldn't take me on either." Educating through the teaching story follows many of the patterns in other kinds of instruction. For example, there will always be some people, very few, in any community, who will be able to understand the whole body of teaching material without any instruction, without the benefit of any specialized institution to impart this knowledge to people in measured and appropriate stages. You might guess how many people would be able to do this if you were to ask yourself, as a rough analogy, how many people in a country without, say, mathematics or poetry would be able to understand the whole of such an art or science just by immersing themselves in poetry or mathematics? From our standpoint, therefore, the question is entirely hypothetical. Besides, it might be noted, why would anyone want to reinvent mathematics? Have you enough time, apart from capacity? For what we call education, teaching, and learning, there have to be teachers, materials, and learners, and these have to be in a certain kind of alignment or relationship for the optimum results to be obtained. We can prepare the climate, introduce ideas, and indicate some usages of teaching stories in an introduction such as this, mentioning the unfamiliarity of the concept of stories, quoting some as illustrations as part of the process, referring to how people have reacted and continue to react to them, showing barriers to using them, and contending that they are indeed highly sophisticated teaching frames. This is what we have been doing, as a sort of gallop around some of the more easily noted relatively exterior features of this really intricate matter. But there is no instant application of the stories as a sort of magic wand, or even as some kind of band-aid dressing. The stories, as a body, and correctly used, offer a remarkable way into another way of thinking and of being. If they are considered only as individual items which can be adopted to add to a repertory, or for any other instantly obvious purpose, they are not much more useful than almost any other literary form intelligently used. The whole, holistic, if you like, body of material and its operation is being introduced now. I would ask you not to be satisfied with imitations. These, as I am sure you already know, are characterized by crypticism on the one hand and telling you what you want to hear on the other. No form of education I know about does that, but cults do. I can do no better than to quote at this point Rumi, one of our great masters. You may have a magic ring, but you must be a Solomon, master of invisible powers, to make it work.
Copyright 2018, the Idries Shah Foundation.